Welcome to the W3C Community Group call for Wednesday, 2nd February 2022. The topic of this call will be block bookings. So this is an amendment to the Open Booking API specification that's been proposed. And before we kick off, I'll just go around my screen, asking people to introduce themselves. First of all, Nathan.
I'm Nathan Salter. I'm the lead developer at Playfinder and BookTech.
Thank you, Nathan. Phil.
Phil Allen, Senior Developer, Gladstone.
Thank you, Phil. Andrew Marshall.
Andrew Marshall, Principal Architect at Gladstone.
Thank you, Andrew. Simon.
Simon Parr, Development Manager at Gladstone.
Tim Corby.
I'm Tim Corby, OpenActive Engagement Consultant working for the Open Data Institute.
And Debbie.
Debbie Giordano, part of the Everyone Active team.
Thank you, Debbie. And I'm Timothy Hill, also of the Open Data Institute. So I'm the sort of tech person with Tim leading engagement. So yeah, the topic for the call today is block bookings. This has been kind of on the back burner for a while. Let me just share my screen for the presentation. Yeah. Sorry, one of those situations where the Zoom bar is hiding the tab I need. There we go. Yeah, this has been going since about September or October, I think. This is written up as a GitHub issue and a proposal. However, the first question that I think needs to be answered, which has had some discussion on Slack, is simply, is this something that we do in fact need to add into the spec? Is there a requirement for this or a strong business case? Obviously, it would always be an optional add. This would never be a requirement for OpenActive. But to avoid becoming the specification that ate all the pies, is this something that is in fact demanded by very many clients? Nathan, I know you've been contributing, so I assume that Playfinder BookTech have got at least some clients who need this.
Yeah, so the main client that we were in discussions with that I think this would be helpful for is School Space.
Mm-hmm.
So we started the preliminary work about integrating their OpenActive feed into our website, but we quickly realized that they didn't necessarily want to focus on instant bookings. So that's kind of bookings through the standard booking spec. The majority of their business is actually block bookings. So bookings over longer periods of time. And the current booking spec as it isn't particularly well suited to deal with this because bookings over longer periods of time have a more complex user flow than I think the current booking API allows. One of the main things is that availability as it stretches far into the future is a lot more complicated than simple slot-based availability. And sometimes, for example, you want to do different times that aren't necessarily in the slots. So, or a different period. So a common use case would be if you're hiring a football pitch for a football team, then you might need it for 90 minutes, you might need it for an hour or 2 hours. And in order to provide all of those different slot opportunities, starting at every 15 minutes, would be an enormous amount of space in the feed taken up with that. So it doesn't really work when you start stretching above a few months. As for ourselves, we are actually working on block bookings internally to allow instant block bookings through Playfinder. So this is something that we will be doing ourselves, whether or not there is space in the OpenActive spec for it.
Right, okay, so there's a distinct commercial reason for it that makes it worth your time, even if...
Exactly, yeah. Block bookings tend to, obviously they're for much higher values. And because they're often with like established football clubs and things like that, rather than just individual people, the actual maintenance of them and is a lot lower per booking, because you're dealing with maybe 100 bookings or 200 bookings at a time, but just with one customer rather than with 100 different customers. So there is, I think, a very clear use case for being able to do block bookings through the OpenActive spec.
Okay, and would it be fair to say that that is true of the school space in general, that those kinds of that business model tends to be blocky?
Yeah, I think obviously I don't run any schools, but most of our customers who are schools, it works quite well for them because they often need to do compliance-based checks on people if they're in school grounds, especially if that's during term time, because there might be children on site. So sometimes they need to do DBS checks, sometimes they need to do just kind of public liability checks and things like that. So, or just have a risk assessment filled out. So that would be the example for Schools Plus, is they need risk assessments filled out for all of their schools.
Okay, thank you, Nathan. So that was very lucid. Debbie, is this something that you see everyone active having a requirement for?
We haven't had anybody come to us and ask us for it yet. My brain immediately goes to all the problems with this sort of a thing. Block bookings in our world, I guess there's different types, same as Nathan mentioned, schools, clubs, like established clubs like swimming clubs, but then there is the five-a-side team that want to reserve the same time each week. The complications come, I guess, around the payment methods as well. So the established clubs like the swimming clubs and the schools will want to be paying by invoicing rather than by online, making online payments and things like that for us. So I would really struggle to understand how that would all work with using an open data solution. And also every request is different. So it's not like open bookings where you can hire a five-a-side court and it's always going to be 60 minutes and it's always going to be this price. From an everyone active perspective, I guess everyone is negotiable from a price perspective, and a time perspective as well. So if they want an hour and 15 minutes or an hour and 20 minutes or anything like that, that's all part of the conversation that you would have with the hirer, and the cost would be based on that. So it's how you would create a standard approach within a business like ours, which was what we would have to do, I think, to enable block bookings to be booked through OpenActive. I think that would be a bigger challenge.
Okay, so you would normally expect right now what happens is that, say, the five-a-side club would give you a ring and say, hi, we're looking for 105 minutes, say we need 15 minutes and we want a 90-minute game. And we're looking at it 6 months in advance. What kind of price can you do? And then there'd be a conversation about that, more ad hoc kind of. Right.
Yeah,
okay.
it is at the moment. Yeah, as some on a site-by-site basis, they may have their own sort of pricing structure, but we tend to get dictated by the client when we take over those facilities, to say if a club wants to hire a space, that pricing is different to a person just wanting to hire the space for a casual use. There's things like commercial rates that come into block booking hire as well. If a club's hiring a space to then resell that space onto somebody else in a way like an external judo club or something like that charges people to attend that judo club, then that's a commercial rate. It's a different rate that we would charge for somebody that's just hiring that hall to play football as a standard. So all these things are variable as part of it, rather than it being, this is a five-a-side court, this is how much it will cost if you want to book it as a one-off, which is pretty set in stone.
So Nathan, in the case of Playfinder BookTech, is it just simply that you've got a different and sort of streamlined model for those kinds of things?
Not necessarily, actually. So something that Debbie mentioned that is quite significant is the pricing can be quite complicated. And I think that might be an issue with the GitHub issue that Nick has written up, is that it doesn't necessarily handle the complexities of pricing. And also then you have the complexities of VAT as well. So there is often a VAT exemption when you have more than 10 block bookings in an order. So I feel like the obvious fix for that is basically supply as much data as possible up front. So maybe the first request you send has to supply the customer and supply all of the booking slots that you want. And then the response is basically saying, these slots are available. This is how much they're going to be for each of these bookings that you want to make. And if there are slots which are not available, these are potentially alternative times that you could book.
Right. Okay. So we end up defining quite a different flow then, ultimately. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the current booking spec is great for instant bookings, but I don't think it really works with this. The note that Debbie made about pricing, not pricing, sorry, about payment, hopefully won't cause too many problems, because payment's kind of out of band of the spec anyway. So you might have to have some sort of agreement about how to communicate that to the customer, because that's going to be different per booking system. Some will offer invoicing, some won't. Some will have direct debit payments, some will have just card payments. So I think that discussion probably should stay out of the specification, but we should at least provide a place in which you can indicate kind of what payment is required in some form, and leave that very, very open.
Right. And I think this is kind of a pattern that evolved out of the membership discussion as well, that there's an awful lot of stuff which is sort of guidance for out of band issues.
Yes.
And so there's, maybe one field or something defined for communicating that kind of information. And then there would be a larger piece about sort of steering people right. Yeah. So others on the call who are maybe more focused on the on technical implementation, are there any concerns you've got so far, or should we look at the proposal itself?
I think from a Gladstone perspective, as you know, just to back up both those points, I mean, you know, I don't think any of us are against, you know, longer term some form of solution, but where we find ourselves right now is, you know, we've even changed the term block bookings to complex bookings, because it really is so many different layers that we need to build into our system to facilitate all the different types of organizations that use us. And so it could be multiple resources, it could be different days of the week. It's all the little nuances as well, that once someone's booked in, how easily can they change a day to another day? And once that booking's been made, how do they cancel one of those dates? The correct tax rate, how often they're billed, what they're billed for. There's so many different layers. And so for us, I think right now, you know, it's something we want to look at in the future, but it's not, we need to properly scope it out.
And tell me if I'm wrong, Andrew, but I can't, in my head, I can't even see a way in the current +2 setup that this would be possible.
No,
like
so
it's not as if you can create 100 different activity types, and that's what's fed through, and the availability for them, which all contain different pricing and durations, and like that's what you're talking about. But that's definitely not sort of the thing that you would want to do, really, is it?
No, and you'd have to make sure that you're bringing forward 10 weeks of bookings into when you're loading up the availability as well. So obviously, as you know, you restrict that down to keep the speed there. So even that's a consideration as well. So for us in our new product set we're building, that's definitely on the radar of things we want to do. But as you say, right now with the current product, I think it would just be one of those projects that goes on forever and never delivers what people actually want.
And if I'm being completely honest, the conversations that we've had within EA is that we want to try at some point and change all of those block bookers to pay by direct debit instead of paying by invoice or paying cash. So that brings a whole other dynamic into this conversation, where we don't do any OpenActive direct debit sign-ups at the moment. So it feels like it might be a bit of a wasted journey for us if it's not the one that we want, the end point that we want to end up at, if that makes sense.
Yep.
Okay, so for the larger organizations on the call, let's say this is sort of over the hills and far away, that I suppose if it were there and bundled and complete as a specification, it would be easier to implement at the point where you thought it was useful to implement, but that doesn't look like something that can happen easily now.
I think you probably agree with that, wouldn't you, Simon?
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think it's on our roadmap for the long term, but we know that this is a very complex feature and will require a lot of innovation development to get it to work. So having a specification might help that process somewhere down the line, but yeah, we'd have to do our own implementation and specification as well to make sure it works.
Okay, what's your timeline looking like at Playfinder Book Tech, Nathan?
Let me just have a look at our roadmap and I'll let you know. Sorry, Trello is taking a long time to load. But, blog buckets. We're looking at starting that work next month.
Oh, right. Okay. Very imminent. Okay. Yeah.
Yes, and we'll probably be completing it probably the month after.
Right. Okay. So it's looking at a couple of sprints. Right. I think. Well, let's see. Let's go through the proposal. See how many issues we can flush out.
Sure.
And yeah, whether it's the specification process that's leading or whether it's Playfinder implementation that's leading that discussion, we'll shake out. So yeah. So right now, it really comes down to only 2 issues on GitHub, and it's actually. There was a lot of conversation that I watched between Nathan and Nick on Slack, kind of looking at different approaches, and it did land on this as kind of the simplest approach, I think, to how you would do this. Although, as Nathan said, maybe it's not representing all of the complexity that it needs to.
Yeah.
So the first point, I suppose, is that these are treated quite differently from regular bookable slots. So we'd have a different way of scheduling it, basically, so that you don't end up with these huge feeds filled with a million slots. That you specify the schedule, the recurring schedule, using a compact syntax.
Yes.
Which should be given somewhere down here. Yeah, it's done like that. So you have just a little array of dates, basically, in one data item.
Yeah, so essentially this is kind of reversing the way that slots work, to be a slot is a time period, and then you have a list of available dates of that. Normally, block bookings don't tend to go more than a year in advance, especially from schools, because they tend to do things on like the school year.
And then, yeah, the other information you'd need is compactly represented up here. So you've got the duration, start and end. I mean, even this, in a way, the by day is there as a kind of convenience, I suppose. You could get all the information you needed just out of the available date array.
Yeah.
So it's a compact representation. And this would presumably be in a separate feed rather than mixed in with the other slots. So you'd know what you were getting there. Let's see here. I suppose it's this bit which is causing consternation, that this is not going to do for many use cases.
Yeah, I think we're rapidly going to come across issues where the pricing is too complicated to to be able to provide that before getting some information.
Right. Okay. So what are the variables that would affect what that price is? Because in regular slots, right? I mean, you can, this is an array, so you can just specify a lot of different offers, and then that problem is solved to some extent. Is it more complicated in the case of block bookings? Are there what are the factors that affect?
Yeah, I don't actually have a huge amount of knowledge about what affects the pricing on these. From our perspective, from BookTech, the pricing for this is reasonably simple, I guess, because although the slot price will potentially change each week, so what we might end up is basically a new slot price each week, so a new block booking schedule every week, depending on what the pricing is at that point. So although it is in theory it will reduce the data a lot, I think in practice you'll end up with quite a lot of slots as the price changes throughout the year.
So just so I understand what you're saying, so it would be that the slots start off at one price, a little bit like airline booking or something, that the slots will start off at one price, and then if in 2 weeks those slots don't go, there would be a reduction in price or something like that? Or is it?
No, it's more kind of like seasonal pricing. So you'll have different pricing during bank holidays, different pricing kind of during term time, out of term time, during school holidays, around school holidays, things like that.
Okay, right. So, right, so you might end up with if some of these dates intersect with school holidays, you'd end up with 3 of those dates in a separate data item to represent that.
Yeah, exactly. So the block booking slot schedule, I don't necessarily know if this is a problem per se, but the slot schedule, even if it's just like every Tuesday, it will have gaps and there will be a different price when the price is different on those Tuesdays, which will obviously have to be a different object because the offer is no longer relevant on that.
Right. Okay. Yeah. And I suppose also, and it would be the case, I suppose, that you get a discount potentially if you booked lots and lots. As you mentioned, there was a VAT discount for more than 10.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and as Debbie mentioned, there might be separate pricing depending on if you're an individual or an organization.
Right. Okay. So the individual organization one, I guess that's probably okay. I mean, it creates that sort of browse problem where you don't know.
Yeah.
You can't display the precise price until somebody's logged in and you've got some customer identification. But that kind of thing you could solve with having more than one offer there and then picking the right one out once you've got some.
Yeah, we've definitely discussed ways of solving our problem quite a lot in the customer accounts discussions.
Okay, but you would end up with potentially an explosion just because it could be that prices are different across the board depending on the time. Okay. So that's the kind of I suppose the naive summary there. And then Nathan, you raised a point about you made so duration here is indicating what the minimum time is that you couldn't book. If this was specified, you'd have to book at least half an hour.
Yes, although I think this is actually talking more of like a slot. Me and Nick did discuss a little bit about whether to allow kind of varying lengths. I can't remember if we actually ended up deciding in this issue or not. Let me have a look further down.
Yeah, I think that takes us into the minimum number that need to be booked sequentially conversation. But.
Yes.
Right. So in this sorry, go Nathan.
Yeah. So a general problem is that we need some way of signifying how long a slot you're going to book is for. So this is kind of the example where you don't necessarily know how long someone wants to book for. They might want to book for like 70 minutes or 60 or 90 but the pricing might not necessarily be in that granularity in the offers. So I guess maybe what we need is some kind of minimum granularity. But there also needs to be like a minimum and maximum duration that you can allow people to book for. I think we do go into a little bit of detail on that here.
Right, so this is capturing the granularity. So you'd be booking 30, 60, 90, 120, etc.
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah, and then if we hop over here, this is saying, well, you know, it doesn't make much sense for half an hour, I suppose, but supposing you had 15-minute granularity, yeah. This is saying actually it needs to be at least half an hour. However, but you could conceivably book 45 minutes or an hour or an hour 15. And maximum would be, and you can't book up the whole day. One client only gets, I don't know, 3 hours or something max.
Yeah, exactly.
Right, okay. I mean, that feels, this particular issue feels fairly straightforward, assuming you're happy with the granularity being something like 10 minutes or 15 minutes at a minimum. And then you need some way of specifying it. I guess I'm not sure how often it's useful to specify maximum contiguous booking duration. That I feel like exceptions must be legion in the world of block bookings, where, you know, a holiday camp is going to want to be able to book up, you know, three halls, you know, for a week and a half or 2 weeks.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And,
yeah, so I think maximum contiguous duration should probably be optional, but may be specified.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, yeah. Use it if it's a rule. And I suppose the question is, how do you actually get all of this information? So the alignment is on customer.email. That's sort of the customer identifier.
Yeah. Yeah. So quite a lot of restrictions would be via email.
Okay, right. So yeah, you have to do a lot of processing, lining up all of the slots, working out who's aligned with what, and then you can kind of come to a conclusion about that. But that's fairly easy to represent.
Yeah, one of my concerns about the proposal in general is, unlike all of the other parts of a proposal, it doesn't necessarily reflect a database object. So this kind of, by its inherent nature, has to be generated from your database of slots or availability or timeline or however you manage it. So I'm not necessarily sure if that's going to cause us some problems when implementing. Is trying to, because if it does, you could make it reflect a database object, but then you'd have a problem with trying to keep that in sync with other things in the database. So I'm not sure if anyone else has any thoughts on that, because I don't know how it's modeled in different systems.
Andrew, Simon, Phil, are your heads exploding a bit, or? Oh, sorry, Phil, we can't hear you.
Just a bit, yeah. It's
okay.
It's as Simon was saying, it's not an area that we really have anything doing with at the moment, so it's completely new concepts.
Yeah, I think the basic logic sounds okay so far, but we don't really have this concept at the moment, so we're still just trying to work out what our reference points are.
Right. So what happens? So somebody could conceivably, I suppose, ring up everyone active and say, we want 1 hour, 15 minutes. I think that I read somewhere that was on one of the calls that came up, that was actually the most frequent request was 1 hour, 15 minutes because of sort of kids needing a bit of time to change and all of that stuff. So what would happen right now in a Gladstone system if somebody did do a block booking, just that they communicated over the phone? Presumably somebody has to enter that order into the system.
Yeah, I don't know specifically. I mean, Debbie would possibly know about what happens, how the staff handle that, but typically that's a back office staff that somebody would be speaking to that customer face to face. And yes, you can do it. That there's a very basic, almost wizard created to allow people to do that in the system, but that doesn't extend to online at all.
Right.
So for that, you would see your availability. You would then create that. So you would put in how often it recurs, what time, what facilities are used, and then how often you're going to charge, what you're going to charge, when that money's due, who the lead booker is. So, and then the product that you're going to charge, how much you're going to charge for that product, and then what the applicable rate of VAT against that is as well. And then it will then create that booking.
Right. Okay. And I guess there is a database row somewhere that reflects all of those things.
So the initial kind of query there was that the proposal that I submitted last week was that higher.
I would guess so, but that's not my.
Right.
That's.
Sorry, which bit specifically are you asking? Sorry.
I guess I'm just wondering about Nathan's point that, yeah, if what you've got stored in the database is, say, a schedule, and then you've got all of these kind of 15-minute increments that get specified, generated, I guess, by application logic. How does that get mediated back again into the data store? And I was just thinking that if you've got any kind of process for this at all, even if it's manual, at some point it does have to enter the data store in some way, shape, or form. But it could be that actually the granularity in the backend system is an hour. So if somebody books 15 minutes of that, that hour gets used, and there's just a sort of lack of efficiency there, and maybe some kind of waste or a minimum price set or whatever. I was just wondering how flexible the model layer would be, and what kind of things that model can accommodate right now. But I can also imagine that that's not right at the top of everyone's heads what their schema is for those things.
From a flexibility perspective, for block bookings, it's completely flexible to us. We're down to 5 minutes. We're the ones that say how long a reservation lasts for and how much it's going to cost that individual, like we said before, based on a conversation with that organization.
So you could conceivably set a time somewhere on the interface and say, from 10 o'clock until 10:05 or until 11:05, this is booked.
Yeah.
And then conceivably somebody could ring up and say, at 11:10, I'd like to pick up. Would that be feasible?
Yeah.
Okay, right. So it is as flexible as that. Okay.
Yeah. So I guess the basic answer is you're allowed to at least ask for any booking between the opening times. Kind of as far into the future as you want, but there will be a cutoff where they just won't be accepting block bookings beyond that date.
I guess it's the challenge of there's no type. It doesn't exist. It's not a thing in the MRM database. Block booking is not a thing in the way that a badminton court is a thing. Like, you are creating an activity for a badminton court that reserves that space for 60 minutes every time it's booked, and it always charges this amount. That thing doesn't exist for block bookings. So there's nothing to look for you to get information returned for availability for that thing. Does that make sense? You're looking at an open booking sheet and going, what's available, regardless of what it's for. It's not for anything, just what's available. And then you've got to have a way of manually keying in the customer's requirements.
Right, I see. So are these all linked together in like a central object? So do you have different entities for each time period that they've booked? So like Tuesday at 2 o'clock and Friday at 5. And are they linked to a centralized object?
I don't really understand what you mean, if I'm honest, but they create that class as such. It is a class, and they create it, whereas availability is looking for spaces in an existing class.
Right.
It's a different way of looking at it. And even with things like courts, like badminton courts, it is an existing activity. So it's a facility in the open data world that exists and everything's predetermined within it. So for block bookings, the customer's requirement doesn't exist in either of those.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of along the same lines as what I was mentioning, that there's not like, most people won't have an existing kind of like what's the block booking schedule in their databases. So that would definitely need to be something that they would build. BookTech does the same thing where essentially we have a completely open timeline and bookings exist within that timeline between any 2 dates. And then availability is generated from that. So that's how we generate the slots, is we look at the timeline between the booking window of the facility, and then we basically generate the slots that are available, and save those in a database, and then that powers the feed. So we would need to add a new database object for this block booking schedule that would reflect this, I think.
Right. Okay.
Just a quick question. I might be completely wrong on this, but are we not going to cause some sort of performance issue with this as well? Because it's going to be looking for a whole lot of data each time, rather than just looking. I'm just thinking of let's say the Westminster portal. It will be just looking for a specific badminton court, but suddenly it's going to have to look for 10 weeks of availability and slots.
Yeah, I mean, the notation is very compact. Yeah, because Gladstone, I mean, the existing open data feeds are publishing typically, what, 2 weeks in advance? That's all they materialize.
Yeah.
Ours tend to be about 30 days, but.
Right. Okay. So sorry, Nathan, I don't think I understood. So how, if right now you're kind of materializing 30 days in advance, what is the solution for block booking? It's not to materialize a year in advance. It's to.
No, we need something separate to be able to signify kind of longer term availability.
Right. Okay. Okay. So there's some sort of more compact database representation that you'd use.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
And I guess something that is important is that we don't necessarily need to show all of the times that are available and all of the times that are unavailable during a block booking schedule. I think all we need to do is just show the availability for when the actual venue is open and when it's shut. Because when you're talking about availability kind of over those longer time periods, the actual availability gets a bit more kind of complicated because it might not have materialized yet. So you could say, can I get a booking in 6 months on Tuesday? And it might technically not be taken in the database now, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you can book it, and vice versa. So if you're trying to book every week for 6 months, then the venue might decide to take your booking and ask a customer, or if they've got other things going on like existing events, to move those around to enable to fit your needs better. So
right, so there'd be a knock-on for different customers if that booking was made.
Potentially, or just kind of internal customers. So say, for example, if you like tidy or clean your courts at a specific time each week, but you have someone that wants to do a block booking at that time, I could conceivably see a situation where you would move that to accommodate them.
Right. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I was wondering what an internal customer was, but okay, I see what you mean. At the interface level, I guess what this sort of ends up being sort of like a date and time picker or something like that. Then, it's not the case that you get this sort of giant grid of sections that you can specify, which would normally be how you do it with slots.
Yeah. So the way that we've kind of thought of the best way of basically picking up like 90-95% of use cases is just when someone wants to book the same slot every week for a long period of time. So normally like at least 10 weeks, but sometimes longer than that. So basically the UX that we've settled on is pick a day, pick how long you want, pick when you want it, and pick how many weeks and which days you want it to repeat on. So it might be every Wednesday at 7 o'clock for an hour, or it might be Tuesdays and Thursdays at 3 o'clock for 2 hours, or something like that. And then kind of check the availability after that.
Right. Okay. So it's kind of like it's like a Google Calendar kind of interface, I suppose. Yeah. Like
Yeah, I guess that would be a more accurate description. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. That's coherent at least. But yeah, it does create some complexity on the back end of it. Yeah. It feels like we're almost moving into the domain of like, it's a separate flow. We have separate database objects. I guess we've got different API endpoints, even for kind of analogous operations.
Yeah, I guess the final booking API could probably be the same. I don't see any problems with that, although other people might do. But definitely like the C1, C2 requests don't make so much sense with this.
Yeah.
But the P request and the B request still do make sense, I think.
Right. So once you've assembled the order items, you can proceed from there. But
yeah, so I guess there might be a bit more of an interactive way of working out what the order items should be before you get to the actual booking part. And I think that's kind of like what we need to tighten up.
Right. Okay. So we end up looking at something like, I don't know what the right initial would be, but it would be BB1, BB2, and BB3, I guess.
yeah, exactly.
Right. Okay. So, and I guess that obviously we have to specify that somewhere in this GitHub issue, I think, rather than leaving that as an exercise for the reader.
Yeah. What I'll do is I'll note down to put some of these thoughts down in the GitHub issue.
If you could, that would be fantastic. Because it is very distinctive kind of domain. I guess we do it a little bit like memberships as well, in the sense of, I think this is what would the phrase be? I suppose a community extension to the specification, rather than something that sits in the main document, because it's optional and it's only if you want that very distinctive kind of functionality that you implement this. Yeah. Okay. Well, I feel like my understanding has improved over the course of the last 45 minutes. That's a good thing. I'll just scroll through this and mop up any other issues that come out. But it does seem that, yeah, determining what the flow would be and unpacking a little bit what the model layer implications of this would be a helpful exercise.
Yeah, I think that would be useful. The concern that is with me at the moment is the number of resource blocked, resource unavailable cases that would come up when trying to get the availability, that we might actually end up with a system where if through normal operation the same resources are being used as is being used with block bookings, we may not actually end up with anything being returned. If it's a straight, is there a slot available on a Tuesday at 6 o'clock for the next 10 weeks? The answer is no, because on week 3, somebody's booked to play basketball. Multiply that up, actually very little actually ends up being returned to the user. So without interaction with the provider to say, as we spoke about earlier, can you move basketball an hour earlier to allow this block booking to continue? Or for that 1 week, can we move block booking an hour earlier? it ends up as very complex and actually providing no value to the user.
Right, because the user flow ends up being this kind of horrible, right?
Yeah,
shift. Yeah.
I put my dates in that says I want to play basketball for the next 10 weeks, and nothing comes back. And if they spoke to the center, they could do it for 9 weeks, but not the 10. But trying to represent that on a UI at the moment, I'm struggling to see how that's going to work. So it'd be good to work through the flow and some of those edge cases as well, because I think that will determine the value of this.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think something that I kind of touched upon earlier, which is basically we should probably just assume availability based on opening times, because you're right, it does get too complicated and it's not necessarily fixed. And then we should maybe actually resolve availability during the pre-booking process.
Yeah, it could become a nightmare for the operator going, I can accommodate this with assumed availability. We've gone through, that customer's been disappointed, or I've had to disappoint or mess about my existing customers. Actually, the user experience all round isn't great. So it depends on how flexible the operators could be for it. It's worth working through some examples, I think.
Yeah, I will be updating this GitHub issue and just kind of giving a lot more concrete examples and just kind of how I think the flow should work, based from our internal discussions and the discussions I've had with Nick before.
Thank you.
Okay, that would be great. Yeah, more concrete.
Yeah, I'll try to get that done by the next time we have a W3C call. So.
Oh, that'd be great. Okay, so thank you, Nathan. I suppose the other point to consider, and it sounds like this has been probably bottomed out in the Playfinder discussions, but there is a flow in the booking spec as currently defined, which is an approval flow, where say you submit your intended booking, your intended participation, and then that gives a chance for the provider to actually respond back and either accept or deny that booking. And there's a field in there for messaging so that you can give a rationale or suggest alternatives or whatever. So it could be a question of modifying that flow or taking another look at that flow and seeing how useful that is in this context.
Yeah, I think the assumption is that when you're doing block bookings, it will always go through the proposal, so the pending booking flow with approval flow.
Right, okay. Yeah.
I can't see a situation in which you'd automatically accept a block booking.
Oh, okay, so it is always going to be that proposal flow.
I would imagine so, yeah.
Okay. I think let's leave that there before we generate any more actions for Nathan. And I'll just take that to any other business that anybody wants to raise before I close off the call, because we do have 8 minutes or so.
Not for me.
Okay, fantastic. So I need to get a bunch of videos up for the benefit of various people on the membership call. I will do that later today and let you all know when that's done. Okay, thanks very much.
Thanks a lot, everyone.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Bye for now.
Thanks all.